Welcome to Sikhcast, brought to you by Sikh Research Institute, illuminating every path.
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Thank you and Jiayanu for everyone that's joining us for the launch of Sikh Heritage Month in Brampton today. Before we begin, I'm going to do a land acknowledgement to recognize the relationship between us, the Indigenous peoples, and their traditional territories. Where we are today is the PAMA, the Peel Art Museum and Archives. And this institution is situated on the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, as well as the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, the Huron-Wendat, and the Haudenosaunee peoples. The Peel Art Gallery, Museum and Archives exists within the bounds of the Adjutants Treaty No. 19, agreed upon by the Mississaugas of the Credit and the British Crown in 1818. This area has been home to countless Indigenous peoples since time immemorial, and today is home to many First Nations, Métis, Inuit, and other global Indigenous people. PAMA is grateful to the original stewards of this land and is committed to strengthening its relationship with Indigenous communities, and hopefully so are we. My name is Dhaliwal. I am the co-founder and director of this organization called Poetic Justice Foundation. Our organization works on issues of anti-racism and anti-caste. We work in solidarity on issues of oppression, and we also tangentially work on projects, exhibitions, content that's relevant to Sikh and Punjabi communities. And that's actually why I'm here today, because our organization has been working in partnership with Sikh Heritage Month to produce the exhibition that you would have seen in the galleries outside called 1984 Path of the Warrior Saints. This exhibition was produced with support from the city of Brampton. Attendance is free for the entire month of April for Sikh Heritage Month, and that's due to a very generous donation from the Sikh Foundation of Canada. And the exhibit was curated by your local and internationally renowned artist, Ruby Kaur. So if you haven't seen the exhibit yet, please take a few minutes and hopefully you can walk through those galleries and see what has been produced there. What we're doing today is having a conversation with Harinder Singh. And Harinder Singh is the Senior Fellow for Research and Policy at an organization called the Sikh Research Institute. Harinder is an expert on many matters that are related to Sikh history and contemporary social politics in our community. We're going to be moving through a number of topics today, but in conversation with Harinder today, we're really here to talk about the 40th anniversary of 1984. This is a big year for us. It's a moment of commemoration. And to talk a little bit about what led to that moment in time 40 years ago. How did the community move through it? What were its impacts? How does it affect us today? And hopefully, where do we go from here? So, without further ado, we'll get into it. Shall we start?
Sure. Good morning or afternoon, and Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
So, Harinder, 1984. It's a complex date for our community. It carries a lot of meaning, yet it continues to be shrouded, I think, in some amounts of mystery and fear. As somebody that was like a toddler when 1984 happened, I can't speak to an experience of the violence directly myself, but I know growing up that there was family members in Punjab that were affected by this. There was people in my family that were lost by this. And it was never quite talked about, right? We carried the grief. We knew that there was people missing. But it wasn't until decades later where I myself started pulling on some threads and understanding what 1984 meant to me and how we were impacted by it. So can you describe your personal experience, in Punjab, in and around Amritsar, maybe in the days leading up to the Battle of Amritsar?
Sure. I think the larger part, why it doesn't get talked about, I don't want to start with that actually first. I was having this conversation, I remember, in 98 with Sardar Patwant Singh. And he used a phrase, because he was in Delhi when this happened as well. He says, Harinder, there is a larger conspiracy of silence. So this conspiracy of silence is in our homes too. It's not just in the state. So that's what you were referring to partly. And I felt that in my home because the 84 direct two things I can mention is we were actually, with my family, I was in the Darbar Sahib complex till May 30th. There is a Shahidi Jatha which goes to commemorate the Shahidi Gurpurb of Guru Arjan Sahib actually. We go to Pakistan from India, they still go. And we were part of that. And I remember I excitedly went to the Darbar Sahib complex at that time because I grew up in Jhansi, UP, which is not in Punjab. My version of what Pindranwale and his men, the common phrase at the time, was what the Doordarshan showed. So I'm like, okay, and I'm hearing about this just like anyone else would hear in India. But there was a level of excitement. I want to go check out the Sant as well. But I remember from train station going all the way to complex, there were 3 checkups. Because the Punjab police check kar rahi hai, sometimes CRPF is doing. Army presence was already beginning to be seen there. So that was kind of weird. Ki ho raha. But I do remember we went where, because Sant used to come publicly and have a conversation, some Q&As. But that day he came and then it got cancelled. So it was a disappointment also, because obviously now we know there was something else brewing, and this was May 30th, I remember. But when we came back from Pakistan, I want to mention that part more, because this is all I know upfront. June 6th, we were supposed to come back from Lahore to Atari. That's the train station on the Indian side. And our train from Lahore wasn't allowed to come back because we know what was happening on June 6th. I remember seeing on Pakistan TV, starting June 2nd, some reportage every day, what was going on. But, I'm less than 12 years old at that point. But I remember what I saw on TV in Pakistan side. I remember then 2 days later, the Indian government allowed us. So we were in no man's land. We didn't have a visa to come back to India. Pakistan said your visa has expired. You can understand that kind of a nonsense was going on between the two nations. Eventually, when we entered Punjab on the Indian side, on June 8th, we were supposed to get off at Amritsar. There were no announcements. Our train didn't stop in Amritsar. There were like 10 checkings at Atari border. I don't know what they were looking for, as if we were importing some things, now what they call weapons or whatever else. But I remember the train didn't stop till Ambala. Those of you who don't know, you went through the whole of Punjab, and we had no idea where the train will stop. And what I could see from outside the train is literally army personnel, every mile or few, pointing stain guns at us as if we are about to do something. And we could see the darkness in Amritsar at that time. We could see the smoke at the time. So that has lasting impressions. When people tell me, we can't say there was a blackout in Punjab. I mean, I witnessed it. I saw that. We were not allowed to get out in Punjab either until Ambala, which we didn't get off, and we ended up getting off in Delhi itself. But the point is, this is what I remember vaguely, not vaguely, generally, I should say. There is more specifics if you're interested. But quickly on November, I remember when the assassination of Mrs. Gandhi's news, before it broke out, I was in the market in Jhansi, UP. I was buying something at one of the shops, and the guy goes to me, Beta ghar chale jao. Son, go home. I'm like, why? He's like, nahi, ghar chale jao. So he was being kind, because he must have heard on the radio what's going on. And this was in the afternoon. So obviously that night, what had happened by that night, our house was burned. And there was an attempt to arson it. My dad went out with Kirpan. He caught one of the guys, which became pretty drastic because it turned out he had funded his education. So it was a mob hired. We eventually learned, actually my dad turned him into a police station, and that guy was released a couple of days later. When all this was going on, we were kids. The only person in the neighborhood who helped was also a Hindu man. And we went to his house, and 2 days later, he was roughed up in Sadar Bazaar, Jhansi, for helping Sikhs. So there are many things of that nature. So this idea that Congress did all of this, I'll just mention that because many people think it was only Congress. No, we figured out within 2 weeks, the person who had bought the people and sent them to burn our house was actually a Jansangi, which is today's BJP. So everyone took advantage of Sikhs. Congress was spearheading it, but and we know since then that RSS has supported it as well.
So, I mean, I think getting into the human cost of it and what happened to the Sikh people, we're definitely going to get into that. It's interesting that, you know, you were raised in UP, right? Because you're almost like a diasporic Sikh to some extent from like a Sikh homeland. But if we can go back to the narrative a little bit, because you said something interesting about having just seen or heard of Sant Ji on Doordarshan. And so there was a narrative, there was media coverage around him. And this is something that, like, even for myself as a producer of this exhibit, there was a lot to learn for me, right? And there was some interesting themes kind of showing up. And can you speak to the shifts in narrative that you saw around Sant Ji leading up to the operation and Battle of Amritsar, and how the narrative changed afterwards?
On Doordarshan, nobody called him until what quote-unquote Blue Star was. No Doordarshan called him terrorist. No Doordarshan called him Ugrawadi. These are the terms they use in Hindi and other places as well. But after that became a common word. Earlier, he was presented as being one of the radical leaders who Akalis didn't like. Nobody used to call him terrorist. And all of a sudden, I noticed between June and November, in the magazine like India Today even, Tavleen Singhs were putting out articles like Prophet of Hate. That was a cover story of Bhindranwale. So narrative was definitely designed post-June 84 to demonize what I call Jarnail. Jarnail Singh was a Jarnail, so he was actually Jathedar Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale. Now, staying in UP, I didn't know about what his narrative was, but most of my information, which I should tell you, either came from Doordarshan or the army Sikh officers who came to my grandfather's clothing store, tailor shop. They used to tell us about him more. That was our inside information. And I remember in June 84, or 2 weeks before, my Dadaji came home one day and he was telling my dad, ਜਿਹੜੇ ਆ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਚ ਹੀ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਆ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ ਨਾ ਉਹ ਅਫਸਰ ਉਹ ਕਹਿ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ ਕੁਝ ਗੜਬੜ ਹੋਣ ਵਾਲੀ ਹੈ. And we sure enough found out June 84 ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਵੀ same thing we heard a couple of weeks before November. So I would say the army Sikh officers were quite somewhat aware of what was about to happen as well. But I'm connecting that. So first of all, Bhindranwale was not a terrorist until after June 84. I think it's something, a manufactured narrative was made. Now what do? We have assassinated the man, so now let's create what we now call character assassination. And second thing is that there were many sympathizers in the army. We lived in a cantonment town. Those of you who don't know Jhansi, UP, the major general in 1984 in Jhansi, UP was a Sikh man, General Matharu. I remember him because his daughter was in my class, and I think because of him, probably no Sikh got killed because he said, so it just takes, this thing about you can't just be saying, jo marji hove, and there was a second field, which is a Sikh regiment, which was often to be in Jhansi also. And they said the same thing, ki kisi Sikh ko hath la ke dikhao Jhansi. So you gotta have that thing that you gotta answer back, otherwise people take advantage. So there was no Sikh killed in Jhansi, probably because of that, but there were many shops were burned for sure. Houses they tried to burn down. They didn't succeed in all cases, but in many shops they did succeed. There were people from Jhansi who were killed outside of Jhansi. You hear about the trains. I do want to mention that a little bit. You hear about the trains. In 47, you say trains were going back and forth between India and Pakistan filled with bodies. In 84, that's not what happened. In 84 of November, trains were filled going from Jhansi to Delhi, only of Sikhs. So this place where the most killings happened was between Jhansi and Delhi, primarily just hour outside Jhansi, all the way to about a 4-hour train ride all the way to Delhi. That's where most of the Sikh killings happened in trains in 1984.
So, on the one hand, you could look at your life, your personal experiences, and say, it's no accident that you're an activist, you could say, in these realms. You're a researcher, you explore policy, you explore initiatives around Sikh identity and our social politics and our spirituality. How do you think it affects your work, and what other effects have you seen on the community? Because I speak from a position of almost, it's like recovering from a coma to some extent, right? Because I spoke a little bit about my childhood and hearing nothing about this beyond the fact that family members were missing. But there seems to be a greater and appropriate resurgence of memory around 84 now. But there's this long period of kind of amnesia, right? Where it seems like the community was, injured, asleep. So there's something happening. And now there's a bit of a resurgence. But how do you think it affects us? How did it affect you?
Well, I can talk about my effect, but I don't want us to assume, you included and myself included, I don't think there was amnesia for all Sikhs. The Sikhs who were at the receiving end, Sikhs who had become active, pre-84, they were in no amnesia. They were responding. We should see the history of those Sikhs as well, just right after June 84, what they all did. So there was amnesia in public at large, and Sikhs at large. And I would say I was part of that too. I can tell you, we didn't talk about 84 until I moved to US. It took me 10 years to deal with my anger on how to even talk about it. I didn't go back to India. I had developed a hatred for India. I mean, I could have been that 12-year-old with the AK-47 in his hand. That's a very real scenario, because although my family wasn't a victim directly, my Fuffarji was. He somehow survived. People thought he had died. They had taken the petrol out of his own motorcycle and burned him with that. So it's very real. It's not a story which I'm just hearing about. It's something which was happening within the families as well. So I would say there was a conspiracy of silence. Even with myself, within my family, we didn't discuss it. I think partly it is being in America, partly it's growing up in Kansas, which not too many Sikhs. My first conversation wasn't a conversation. I'll share that. I remember my first work on 84 was within 2 years of being in US. We did a documentary which was shown on the PBS channel in Kansas at that time called Red Waters of Amritsar. So within 2 years. But it was still done quietly. We didn't discuss anything at home. I would say it took me about 10 years of dealing with getting rid of the hatred, first of all, which required a lot of work. I would say Bani has a lot to do with it. In my early phase, I took Amrit a year after I came to the US. I think that had a lot to do with it, because I was trying to figure out, what this angry young man is going to do. I think Amrit has to do with it, Bani has to do with it, and about almost 10 years of figuring out, when I do go back to India, how am I going to start dealing with 84, which is another story, we can get into it. But I think those are the kind of things which are very real, and they happen in many people's life. And sometimes the amnesia is 40 years, but sometimes there was no amnesia also.
Amen. So we can talk about 1984 as 40 years ago, but the more things change, the more they sort of stay the same. So what has changed in India as far as the Sikh community, the Sikh political life is concerned, from then till now? What's the same? And what does the state continue to get wrong about us?
I mean, that's a very wide question. Maybe I can go into one dimension of that. I think one thing is for sure, people who stuck to talking about the Sikh narratives of 1984 for first 20 years of that, salute to them, because it's not like in the last 20 years. It's been relatively easier to talk about 84. And I worked with some of them, because part of your activism starts to happen with who are the people talking in America about it at the time. I didn't know who Gurmeet Singh Aulag was, for example. You can agree or disagree with Khalistan, but he was standing there and talking with integrity, anyone who would hear what happened to Sikhs. So I was curious. I went there and I worked for him for, as a summer. That's where I met some of the Ravi Pallas of the world, right now, who are mayors, So I don't think activism just starts out on its own. So one thing I'm saying is that the people who worked on that stuff in India as lawyers, as resistance fighters, as supporters of them, I think we need to acknowledge their work because they were all labeled terrorists for just doing that. To talk about 84, you were a terrorist, you were anti-India. No, it's not true. They were actually doing it within India without creating any hatred for India. But that's the narrative government spun. So I think we don't acknowledge their work. I mean, they were the flag bearers of continuing the Sikh narrative in their own capacities, with a lot of shortcomings, with very meager to no resources, fighting a state which had become so mighty, and had the sympathy of the world. That has changed. I think in the last 20 years, because of their work, now it got easier for people like, well, I call myself a 1.5 generation guy. The second generation, it definitely got easier to start to do some of that work outside India as well as in India. So that's one thing which has changed. And the flip side of that is, I think the scenario in India has also changed. We have to understand the politics of India, which does not just involve Sikhs. We are less than 2% of the issue, but we punch above the weight, so we become the larger issue. But Indian politics has changed in this. I think we have to acknowledge how in last, especially not 10 years, but in last, let's say in last 10 years, legally speaking, extrajudicial killing wise speaking, BJP versus Congress politics, that has allowed for many things. So those things have changed.
So,
including SGPC changing, including, Beyan Singh and Satwant Singh. I know it's a tough narrative, but it's our narrative. We must be able to talk about it. Sukha Jinda is part of our narrative. We cannot just talk about the lawyers who fight. We have to also talk about the ones who fight for justice from a resistance angle. None of them, it took a long time for Akal Takht and SGPC to acknowledge them. People of Punjab acknowledged them within a couple of years. That's what we have to understand, that the people's psyche has always accepted them as being their own. Institutions, it takes a long time. Governments, it takes even longer.
So my next question was actually going to be about political motivations.
Right.
So what were the political motivations, maybe, from SGPC? I mean, I know you were a kid back then, but looking back on it now from your current perspective, what do you think the political motivations were from within the Sikh community versus the government? And what's motivating the current political situation from the government to SGPC, let's say?
I mean, I have my own understanding of this. I would say if we talk about this first quarter of this year, let's make it relevant to now instead of old time. I think right now, the Akali BJP politics has a lot to do with it. It's motivating them to become Panthik again. If you actually look at it, SGPC has taken on, as much as I criticize, they're actually doing many things right. They're refusing to bow down to the hate which is being spewed against Sikhs within India. So acknowledging and owning up to Baba Jarnail Singh Pindrawale, Sant Jarnail Singh Jathedar, whatever term works for you. Owning up to the Shaheeds, owning up to anyone who has done anything about 84. Earlier it used to be just protecting the victims, compensation, help. Now it actually is about owning up to even the resistance fighters, what we call khadkus, what we call, wrongly in my opinion, please pardon me for saying this, I don't believe that's a Sikh narrative. I don't believe they were taking revenge. We have a Sikh narrative of fighting for justice. Those guys were fighting for justice. None of it was personal. Revenge is personal. Revenge is out of hatred. They were so clear. Like even when you look at Beyan Singh and Satwant Singh, I know as hard as it is, and I do want to mention that, you should read the judgments on them and what the lawyer has written, Sodhi, about them. After they did what they did, they put their weapons down. We have done what we needed to, now you can do what you need to. That's not vengeance. You're not running away from what you did. This is the kind of narrative which we see in 18th century as well, right? So I think those narratives are being owned by the SGPCs, I think, and partly by certain Akali Dals, not all Akali Dals. I think the Indian climate is allowing that. Indian climate is allowing some of the 84 November stuff as well, because we have had judgments in last 10 years which have acknowledged some of those things. So it's the need of the BJP and the need of the Akalis which is allowing certain things to happen as well.
So you mentioned memory and storytelling. I hope you don't mind we jump around a little bit because I just thought of something. There's an Indian climate, and even though you could say that we operate and live in a Canadian climate, our situation here is very responsive to Punjab and to India, right? It's, I use the word transnational a lot. We're a transnational community, right? Mm-hmm. There's connective tissue everywhere. So the reason we're gathered this morning is for Sikh Heritage Month. The reason I'm here is because of the exhibition, Path of the Warrior Saints. These are memory and storytelling projects, right? What do you see as being the opportunity and the problem with what we're doing with memory and storytelling right now? I know you've got some critiques about the exhibition. We don't need to go fully into that, but in general.
Yes, I think we have to become more genuine. We are not just transnational community, including if you look at the responses, not just in Punjab, within the transnational sense, even the responses here and last year in Canada, they're directly related to what happened in Punjab, including all the issues we are having to deal with, Trudeau, India, and the Five Eyes issues. So we must acknowledge, those of us who are running away, that we are somehow not connected to Punjab. Let's cut our losses. I've heard these phrases in the last 15 years from second generation people who otherwise were very active. They have said this to me. So the pagal aega, bagya ranna aega, we should cut our losses in India and Punjab. I'm like, I like to just mention 3 numbers. Let me just mention those numbers here as well. The current population of Sikhs, 70% live in Punjab. 17% live in India outside Punjab. And 13% lives in what we call diaspora, which is outside of India. So Inspora is 17%. I'm very worried about them in the last 2 years. The communities of Sikhs are being eliminated. And they don't even make the news anymore. In Odisha, in Assam, in Sikkim. So 84 is continuing in a very different way. Coming back to explicitly more, I think we need to become much more genuine in our, I don't like the word storytelling as much, because in Gurbani, this is what I've learned from Gurbani is that the ultimate narrative is the one's narrative, which very funnily see, if you notice, we do so much katha in Sikh community now. And that's caused confusion if you ask me, because in Gurbani it says akat katha, the unnarratable narrative. So unless you have experience of that, how can we tell? So similarly, I think when we talk about 84 and 84 phenomena, Jathedar Pindrawala phenomena, Khadku phenomena, state repression phenomena, all these are all coming together. I think we need to tell a Ghallughara story. That's the term which I have been pushing for last 10 years more and more, because Ghallughara's story is the more complete story. It is not a genocide story. It is also the story of people who fight back. That's our indigenous term from 18th century. So I think if we tell the Ghallughara story, we include everyone. Those who fought the empire or the state, those who were killed by the empire or the state, those who were supporting in any capacity and killed by the state. So when we apply that to 84, it will mean people who fought back, people who said, aren't they? Instead of saying Jarnail Singh Pindrawala was doing the wrong thing, we must understand why he did the same thing, because our 18th century story says that's what Sikhs do. That's the Sikh narrative. At the same time, it includes the SGPC workers who were helping, even the municipality corporation workers who were otherwise transferring the dead bodies, who are on the record now saying, "Sanu inni sharab inna ne pilai taaki assi sunn ho jaye." It includes anyone and everyone who's part of it. That's the Ghallughara narrative. And it is our term, so we can get into it more. I think our more genuine story, where we don't apologize about any narrative, if we get the one's narrative right, which whenever our community has done that, Like today when we talk about Vadda Ghallughara, Chota Ghallughara, I have never heard anyone say Jassa Singh Ahluwalia was wrong. He actually went back, and actually let me mention that here, if I may go on a diversion, because then it will be easier to understand 84. There is a Vadda Ghallughara. Empire at the time is Afghani Empire. The native collaborator with them is a Malerkotla state. This is something like what happened in Punjab, right? In 84 and in India. And who's going to fight back with them? So obviously they cordoned Sikhs. They first eliminated every Sikh in Lahore. That's what happened. They eliminated every single Sikh in Lahore. Then they said, let's go figure out where the rest of them are, the larger amounts. And they cordoned them and they killed them. Numbers range from anywhere from 30,000 to 50,000. And then, there are missiles, like there are chieftains now, political parties, jathebandis. Earlier there were missiles. No one's waiting on everyone to do something, but of those 12 missiles, one actually collaborated with Malerkotla to fight against Sikhs. We call that Folkia missile or Patiala state. So we always have had collaborators with the state as well. But there are 2 missiles. They didn't wait on everyone else, ki sare Sikh ikkatthe ho jange. But Jassa Singh Ahluwalia and Baba Charat Singh Sukra Chakia, Ranjit Singh's grandfather, oh kende appa dono kariye hun kaam. And those 2 got together and they gave him hell. And they kept giving him hell until they captured Lahore within 3 years. That's the Ghallughara narrative. So when we commemorate, and I was just in Punjab, I went there. I saw the exhibition there and what they're trying to do. So, we Chota Ghallughara, Vadda, these are my tirats. This year, when I was in Punjab, these are the 2 places I went to. I want to understand what happened, where it happened, at Kannuwan and at Kup. So do realize our narrative has to be, we cannot eliminate any story. There are always collaborators with the state and the empire. There are always people who fight back. There are always people who are victims of what we now call collateral damages. There are always people who are supporting one or the other side. They also die within there. So that's why we say, ਅਸੀਂ Ghallughara ਮਨਾਉਂਦੇ ਹਾਂ, Ghallughara ਕਰਦੇ ਉਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸਾਰੇ ਜਣੇ ਆ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਨੇ ਫਿਰ. We don't. So we have an issue of not including the resistance fighters, and I think we need to try a little bit harder to include them in our narrative.
So on the trying harder part, I want to talk a little bit about your organization, Sikh Research Institute,
Okay.
if you don't mind. So in terms of what we should do, right? How is Sikh Research Institute contributing? What's the work you're doing there? Sikh Heritage Month is a particular initiative. I mean, it's happening in BC as well. And, for me, I think they're incredible initiatives because it gives us an opportunity to actually start working in spaces and start, I think these events sometimes get promoted as an opportunity to connect with wider communities and, have other people understand us. But frankly speaking, every Sikh Heritage Month that's happened, I've gotten a better understanding of Sikhi and Sikhs myself. And I know that that's one of the stated missions of the Sikh Research Institute. So what are you guys doing to reflect some of what you're talking about, the importance of memory and these narratives?
I think in October or November of last year, we had this conversation at Institute in our people who are part of the programming. And we said, how are we going to commemorate the 40th anniversary? So we ended up coming with a bunch of things. We are producing 10 research papers this year. February to November, we are publishing them. Because our work is all about internal development in the community. I am one of those who believe that don't worry about telling the narrative to the world. First, let's get it clearer to ourselves. And then you'll be able to tell it in the best way possible, right? So we are doing podcasts. We are doing 2 curriculum for kids on how to talk about it. And the anniversary, 20 years ago, we created a curriculum and a lesson plan with Insaf because we thought they are the ones we should be working to tell this story better. We're going to do it again this year to revise that. We also have podcasts and webinars. We have a publication, a children's book, bilingual one, on how to talk to children about this. We've always told a story. One of the things we have to realize, so Sikh Research Institute, our weekly post this year, we picked the 2 books which were published within 2 years of 84, and we are telling them from their angle. So we have forgotten That's what I said earlier. The people who worked in the first 2-3 years of 84, Sikhs and non-Sikhs, they actually captured a lot of data right. Don't expect them to capture your narrative, but they got a lot of good data because they were there. They were recording it. Whether it is a Justice Secrecy Commission or PUDR, people who are at the forefront of them. Nobody called them terrorists. When Sikhs start doing it because we are adding a Sikh narrative, then they start calling Sikhs terrorists. So the point is, Institute is really interested in that. We have been doing this, by the way. I remember in Toronto, I just thought of this. I remember in 2006, there was a conversation here. I remember going back to it, what can we do? At that time, I worked with Mr. Fulka, Sardar Patwan Singh. There was 2-3 volunteers from here. We want to set up a rehabilitation and de-addiction program for the survivors of November 84 in Delhi. And but it ran out of steam within 2-3 years because people don't want to work on consistent things. Look, we in Institute and outside of Institute, I am involved in other capacities as well. But in Institute, the idea is we got to tell our narrative in line with Gurmat traditions. We are continuously working on it. We made our year a commemorative year this year to put out everything and anything we can for different age groups, for different mindsets, more research-oriented to smaller version, and we are putting all that out. We believe our narrative we have to become more comprehensive, more compassionate, and less and less apologetic. That's partly becoming genuine.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think for younger generations, having distance in time, but closeness in heritage, it gives you some amount of privilege and safety to be more unapologetic, right? Maybe if you're a little bit at a distance from some of that trauma. One of the really interesting things about this exhibition for me and the programming for this month was that with Rupi Kaur's involvement especially, is that we had artists, from around North America, UK, other parts, really just come out of the woodwork to want to be involved, get connected somehow. And these are some really young people, right? And these are some really contemporary artists. And it was surprising to me as well to say, these are some really fascinating visual artists, sculptors, etc., that want to be a part of this 1984 exhibit. And so you could probably make some judgments about what their level of knowledge is, both historically, on Sikh perspective or narrative. But I think the unifying thing that was very interesting was that all of these people, really believe that this is a story and this is a message that deserved the space, right? It deserved to be told, and they wanted to be a part of it. What their interpretation is, varied, right? But in general, there is an understanding and a hope and a wish that there is more understanding for themselves and for the world, frankly, the wider community, about what 1984 was and is for us. Let's just pretend that you were able to hold court with these young contemporary artists right now that are involved with this exhibition. What message would you give them from your background and perspective on how to approach a topic around 1984?
I would say get a little bit more diligent and serious. Because right now, I think we are still in romance. I saw this generation in my generation as well. And I'm using this word because somebody called me 2 months ago who hasn't talked to me in a while. And I know them very well. And he asked for something to discuss something. I'm like, why are you interested in this now? You know what he says? He's like, you have remained serious for the last 20 years. I do believe we are not serious enough. And I'm saying this, it's not a criticism. I think it's a great opportunity. Because look, when somebody makes a great movie, what makes it a great biopic? You live and breathe that role. Otherwise, you can tell it wasn't as good. What makes it a great artist? The one who understands everything. If you're going to draw even a sketch of, forget Guru Sahibs, ਮੈਂ ਤਾਂ ਕਹਿੰਦਾ ਨਾ ਬਣਾਇਆ ਕਰੋ ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਅਜੇ ਬਾਣੀ ਸਮਝ ਹੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਆ ਰਹੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਕੁਝ ਹੋਰ ਬਣਾ ਦਿੰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਈਵਨ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਭਿੰਡਰਾਂ ਵਾਲੇ ਨੂੰ ਵੀ ਬਣਾਉਣਾ ਨਾ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸਾਰੀਆਂ ਸਪੀਚਸ ਤਾਂ ਪੜ੍ਹ ਲਓ ਉਹਦੀਆਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਅਦਰਵਾਈਜ਼ ਅਸੀਂ ਕੁਝ ਹੋਰ ਬਣਾ ਦਿੰਦੇ ਹਾਂ so interpretation should always be there. I think this is a great opportunity. There's a comfort, there is a level of remove, there's a privilege, all of that is there, right? But how about being more serious? I used to challenge artists कि मैनू उस माँ का चेहरा बनाओ जिन्हें मीर बंदो की प्रेजेंस अपने गले विच अपने बच्चों के टोटियां दे करा के हार पवा ले. That's Siddhak. I don't want Chaddi Kala as a phrase. Chaddi Kala in Sikh Ardas is an outcome of Nanak Naam Chaddi Kala. That culture of Naam produces Chaddi Kala, otherwise it's a good marketing logo. And I think that seriousness of understanding the one you are drawing or depicting or presenting, even if you cannot be that, which artists are not, people who play their roles are not, but they are so serious about understanding so many elements of them, right? So I would say I'm actually very happy to see that there is an excitement and sort of less fear on 84. I think that's something to be celebrated. Again, I want to give credit to the people who did it for first 20 years. But then now I want to demand more seriousness. You have more resources, you have more training. I want to see more nuancing. I want to see more granularity. We can't be oversimplifying things. And then the creative expression will be out of this world.
Yeah, I mean, for the artists that were getting attracted to this exhibition and this space, I don't think courage was missing, right? In fact, most of the courage actually came from the artists that wanted to be part of the exhibition. But what happens is, I think there's still a bit of a generational negotiation we're doing with 1984. So one of the things that was interesting to me was seeing how these negotiations were playing out, right? Because art is art, right? And an artist should be allowed to express themselves, do it courageously. That's their interpretation, right? And if they can back up their interpretation, let it stand. But there still is a bit of a wider fear in the community, though, right? Of what will happen if we present our freedom fighters, right? What will happen if we're too naked with a story of how we fought for justice, right? And that then even creates some compromise in spaces that you think would be more courageous because we have so much privilege, right? So how do we navigate that? Because there is a rising generation of courageous people, but there's a palpable fear, I think, in diasporic Sikh communities that still needs to be negotiated.
I don't have a very good answer for that, but I can give you a bit of a survey answer. I think we get too sophisticated with our word choices. If you're courageous, then how can there be fear? The Gurbani narrative is, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਮੂਲ ਮੰਤਰ ਚੋਂ ਹੀ ਦੇਖ ਲਓ, ਜਿਹੜਾ ਨਿਰਭਉ ਨਿਰਵੈਰ ਆ, ਉਹ ਸਾਰਾ ਕੁਝ ਹੀ ਗੁਰਪ੍ਰਸਾਦ ਚ ਲੈਂਦਾ. So there is something, we are getting intellectually sophisticated with how we explain certain terms. And we need to go back to our basic foundational understanding. Now I say this, that I've been working, literally I have worked with visual artists, documentary makers, archivists, rehabilitation workers, lawyers, militants, police officers who did tortures in last 25 years. I don't think the issue is courage as much. It really is. That's why I introduced that, the art term is Ghallughara. Let's embrace Ghallughara. That's our way in. I don't think anyone will tell us that you can't use that term. That's our term. I remember 20 years ago, jab anniversary the, I've been involved, we've supported through Institute making of plays, documentaries. That fear remains because somehow we want to stay safe. Mm-hmm. Okay? So I'm giving the third angle now. And you cannot be safe. This is why I have no issue talking about any of this, because I feel, I'm not telling my story. This is not about my story. People are telling their own stories now. That's part of the problem. We got to tell the Sikh story. And to tell the Sikh story, you have to understand Sikhi. ਹੁਣ ਆਪਣੀ ਸਟੋਰੀ ਦੱਸਣੀ ਹੋਵੇ, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਮਰਜ਼ੀ ਸ਼ੋਅ ਤੇ ਜਾ ਕੇ ਜੋ ਮਰਜ਼ੀ ਬੋਲ ਦੋ, it's fine. But if you're going to tell a Sikh story, You can't take the Bani out. You can't take the Sikh ethos out. So I would say our opportunity is more there. And I think people in Punjab has embraced this more. People in India have embraced this more. And they have more to fear from this government. But they are embracing it more. Vocab. ਤੁਸੀਂ ਦੇਖੋ ਫਾਰਮਰਸ ਪ੍ਰੋਟੈਸਟ ਤੇ ਸਿੱਖ ਵੋਕੈਬਲਰੀ ਲਾਇਆ ਹੈ ਅਸੀਂ ਜੋ ਮਰਜ਼ੀ ਬੋਲੀਏ ਇੰਡੀਆ ਸਿੱਖ ਵੋਕੈਬ the leftists of Bengal use the term Chatha for their group now. That's our term from 100 years ago. So ਸਾਡਾ narrative ਹੋਰ ਲੋਕੀ ਲੈ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਉਹ powerful ਆ. Last week, people in Tamil Nadu are saying we are becoming Sikhs and we're going to fight elections now because the only place, even with all our shortcomings, we are saying only the Sikh manifesto of Guru Granth Sahib is allowing us to be treated equally. So our story is very, very powerful. I think we need not make it too individualized. When I listen to serious khadkus, not the government agents or the shady ones, because we have to talk about that in 84 as well. They rarely tell their story. They're telling us why they left at best. Then the rest they're talking about, it's all about the Panth. So ਜਿਹੜੀ ਪੰਥ ਦੀ ਗਾਥਾ ਹੈਗੀ ਆ ਨਾ, and I'm going to leave it there. The early Sikh historical books, they're all about the Panth. They're not about individuals. Now we're telling too many individual stories and we're not telling Panth story. And Ghallughara's 84, sovereignty, they're all about the Panth. They're not about any individual.
All right, thank you. Before we close up, is there any last message you want to leave with the audience that we can close on?
Look, the message is same. 84 ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਿਹੜੇ 84 ਦਾ ਝੰਡੇ ਬਰਦਾਰ ਨੇ ਨਾ ਉਹ ਕੀ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਨੇ 84 ਬਾਰੇ if they are still alive. I don't know if you even recall what they say about 84. So this is not about what I think. So one, whether you like it or not, the Jathedar of the Panth, not a Akal Takht, appointed by a particular political party, was Jarnail Singh Pindrawale, Sant Bapa Jarnail Singh Pindrawale, whichever term you prefer. What was his response when they said that the army is coming? So, ek to dasna bahut zaruri hai na. He said, "Phaan deo." So we should be able to tell that. Now we very proudly tell that when General Harbaksh Singh said and defied the orders of generals sitting in Delhi when they said retrieve in 1971 from Jhelum. He says, no, this is my place, I'm not retrieving. Otherwise, Indian borders would have been at Byas. Jhelum, sorry, Byas. No. So, je 71 da Indian narrative das rahe, 84 da Sikh narrative da dasso. And I equally value General Harbaksh Singh because of that defiance, right, to the authorities, including his superior generals. Second thing, because there are many things of 84, the second thing is about what happened in Delhi. So please stop saying कि सिखा ने कुछ नहीं किया. ये मेरे वर्गे arrogant बंदे बोलते हैं सिखा ने कुछ नहीं किया. किमें नहीं किया? We don't go kill people. We do political work. And then we do a lot more social and development work. Within 2 years, people did things. As much as we are not able to talk about it, we must talk about it, that Mrs. Gandhi was the Prime Minister responsible. General Vaidya was the token general responsible. Lalit Makand was the planner of the Delhi area genocidal campaigns. People took care of that. It's hard to talk about, but that's our history. ਜਿਵੇਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਮੱਸੇ ਰੰਗਣ ਦੀ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ ਨਾ, ਲਖਪਤ ਰਾਏ ਜਸਵੰਤ ਰਾਏ ਦੀ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ, and many others from 18th century, we got to go back to that. Please stop saying ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਨੇ ਕੁਛ ਨਹੀਂ ਕੀਤਾ. No, ਬਲਕਿ ਸਾਡਾ ਨੈਰੇਟਿਵ ਇਹ ਬਦਲ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਹੈਗਾ. ਮੈਂ ਇਹ ਗੱਲ ਕਹਿ ਰਿਹਾ ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਤਾਂ ਜੀ ਸਟੇਟ ਦੇ ਵੇਟ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ. No, we don't wait on state. We have never waited on state. We work with the state as well, but we don't wait on them. So those who work with the state from a legal angle, from rehabilitation angle, from narrative angles, well, more power to them as well. But do not eliminate the ones who did do things. And that's our idea of justice, and we moved on to sovereignty battles then. And since then, if we have lost that battle, we moved on to look at the great work Insaf is doing. Look at the work Mr. Fulka has done. Look at the work of so many rehabilitation organizations And I'm going to end, just at the end say one thing. About 10 years ago, this person got really power and he says कि मैं ना widow colony ਦੇ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਦੀ help ਕਰਨੀ ਆ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਦੱਸੋ ਮੈਂ ਕਿੱਥੇ ਪੈਸੇ ਭੇਜਾਂ ਮੈਂ ਕਿਹਾ please ਨਾ ਭੇਜਿਓ because I worked with organizations who do that they don't get to the people ਮੈਂ ਕਿਹਾ here is the address I'll take you to the colony go give it to them themselves so ਆਪ directly ਕਰਨਾ ਵੀ ਸਿੱਖੋ because our organizations are not yet fully capable of delivering we have to strengthen our organization to deliver so please go back to the narrative of the ones who did things, not who didn't do things. ਤੇ ਕਰਨ ਵਾਲੇ ਵੀ ਬਹੁਤ ਨੇ ਬੜਿਆਂ ਨੇ ਬਹੁਤ ਕੁਝ ਕੀਤਾ so go to their narrative because they were in the field and secondly ਆਪਣੇ ਹੱਥੋਂ ਕਿਛ ਥੋ this is a Sikh narrative ਕਾਲ ਖਾਏ ਕਿਛ ਹੱਥੋਂ ਦੇ contribute yourself whatever you can don't think these are institutional answers there because our institutions have to be strengthened again to do much more meaningful and much larger scale work. And until then, you do it yourself. Develop your own organizations, your own subgroups, and go take care of some business. If not people take care of the businesses, Panth will be blossoming again. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
I wanted to end today on a thematic note of in the face of opposition. I think ordeal is something that I'm going to take away from here. So thank you everybody for joining.
You were listening to Sickcast by Sikh Research Institute, illuminating every path.